Something sad happened last week. My favorite, one and only, cat died. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity for telling stories about Cushy, our cat, and it's a time to remember him and a time to thank him for having come into our life and choosing us, because that's what they do. And so I'm going to start by telling you how I met this cat, or actually how this cat chose me. I was visiting my friend Christine up in Maine, and she had a litter of kittens that she wanted to get rid of. And we were having a nice visit, and there was a stone wall around her house, and I was walking to and from my car to bring something in, and this little gray cat with a little star on his forehead began following me, and he kept following me. And Chris said, "Ooh, Judy, that's Cushy. He likes you." And I thought, well, I don't need a cat. Don't even think about it. However, my best friend put that cat in a cage and traveled 2 hours, 3 hours to where I was living right here with Phil Gray, and she brought the cat in out of the cage. "You have to take this cat. Isn't he cute? How can you say no? How can you say no to these beautiful green amber eyes in this adorable body? A cat that didn't have a tail. It made him very unique. He had a little stubby for a tail. He was a Manx. In fact, if Cushy had been a dog, he'd probably be a Boston Terrier. He had that big head, the short little feet, the muscular kind of, almost a chest like a little bull. Yeah, actually, he had a temper like a bull too. He was a very adorable cat with an enormous personality. One of our most memorable stories about Cushy is his fear of the vacuum cleaner story. Right here, this is a pretty small house, and I don't know if you could see this, but we go around the corner here and there's the kitchen. Right over there is a sink, and there's a wall, and underneath the sink there's a crawl space. Now Cushy, you know how cats are, they always have to go and go to places where they shouldn't go, and Cushy just wanted to explore what was underneath the sink, and he was already familiar with his path. If we left that door under the sink cabinet open, he would, you know, go through there and explore the crawl space underneath the house, where who knows what there was. Usually there was something gummy that got stuck on his fur, and his fur would get all cruddy and matted. But so we didn't like him under there, so we were always trying to close the door, and he was always hoping it would be open. Well, one day Phil and I were hanging out here in the house, and I was cleaning. So I had started the hot soapy dishwater and was letting it soak for a few minutes, and then Phil was emptying the garbage, so the door was open. Cushy was watching us, and we weren't paying too much attention to him till I turned on the vacuum cleaner. Then Cushy became airborne, and he was all over the house trying to escape the sound of the vacuum cleaner. And he was about a couple of months old, right? And he was flying. He was on the counter, and he was playing. You could see him flying through the air just like Superman, and he was diving right for underneath the sink, where just a few minutes ago he knew that door had been open, and he was planning on going through there anyway. Well, in this moment of escape, he was bound and determined to get into that space. However, I had closed the door. I had closed the door. So there he was, airborne and flying through the air, and realized the door was closed. Where was he going to go? So he landed in the sink, in the hot, soapy dishwater. And you should have seen that look on his face. Those big green eyes, and his little pink nose, and his paws, white paws and gray arms were flailing through the air. Soap suds were going all over the place, and he had bounded out of the dishwater in no time and flew over here in the living room, back to the vacuum cleaner, running around. So, well, we learned we did not ever turn on the vacuum cleaner when he was in the room again.
Hi, I'm Phil Gray, Cushy's dad, and I didn't even realize what was going on, so I turned the vacuum cleaner back on. Cushy turned around, he ran back in the kitchen, made the same leap and landed in the sink a second time. By that time we both realized that he was terrified of the vacuum cleaner, and I shut it off. I think he went finally running upstairs, and it spent the rest of the day upstairs hiding underneath the bed. He had a nervous temperament, and when he took off sometimes he didn't stop. And we found out later when Judy took him outdoors. We kept him indoors for the first month and a half, and finally in the middle of December Judy took him outdoors for a little walk, and she just got out behind the house and she was keeping a close eye on him, and he was just slowly walking, sniffing things on the ground. And she turned around to look back at the house for a minute, and when she turned around he had taken off. And we no idea what happened, what was, but he took off and he just kept going, and she kept calling. And I came home from work that night and we went out and we walked all around my property, all through the woods, and calling, and Cushy just didn't come back. We had a huge snowstorm the next day, and 1.5 feet of snow fell. And I had a crawl space underneath my house, and I left the door open so he could get under the house. He was gone for 11 days, and then we had a second big snowstorm coming in, and I came home from work on Friday night, and with a big snowstorm coming, I closed the door under the house so the snow wouldn't get in there. And we were really giving up all hope of Cushy surviving out there in 2 major snowstorms at the end of December and into the first week in January.
I called the animal control people and said, you know, if you see a gray and white cat wandering around, it's ours. You know, it has no collar on it. We never got to it. We were going to, but we didn't get to it. Well, the animal control officer, a very gruff sounding woman, said, I think we found your cat. We may have found your cat. I said, really? Tell me about it. Where is he? You know, she said, well, it's dead. I said, oh my God, no. Oh no. She says, well, it may not be yours, but you can come and have a look. I know how we could tell if it's Cushy or not. Cushy doesn't have a tail. It's got a stubby tail, and can you just look? And well, that's an easy one. And there was a silence on the phone, and she said, well, it may not be that simple. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, this cat has been, well, that part of him has been eaten by an animal. No, how are we gonna know? Well, Phil was the one. We drove over to that animal control shelter, whatever it was, and Phil had to go and look in a freezer at a dead cat. Well, you know, there's a lot of gray and white cats. It's possible it wasn't ours. It just seemed like an awful coincidence, though, that it was right on the road, right out here, out near the house. So Phil, he's so brave. He went in and he looked. And I waited in the car, and I was watching the door. And when he came out of the animal shelter, I tried to decipher the look on his face and the emotions that may be on that face. But he was deadpan. And it came out, well, was it Cushy? No, it wasn't, he said. At that point he was still lost, but at least he wasn't dead and had been eaten by an animal.
I came home from work, and as I came in the entranceway, I could hear this faint meow coming from under the house. I opened the door, and there was Cushy slowly walking towards me from under the house, very skinny, but I know he'd only been under there for 3 days, because when I closed the door on Friday, of course, I checked, he wasn't there.
When Cushy came back, after that winter, the first time he took off, And then later in the spring, he came out, and we thought, well, we're not going to let him loose this time. I got a pink leash. Must have been, well, not very dignifying for my male cat. But we had a pink leash, and I put him on the cat leash, and I decided to walk him around the area before he would take off again, get used to being right here. So he was sniffing all of every blade of grass and that was coming up, a nice new spring scene, and he was listening to the birds, the bees, the insects, the little buzzing sounds. And it was a wonderful experience for me because I was putting my mind in his for that moment. We went around the back of the house where that crawl space door was. It was open a little bit. And just at that moment, the funniest thing happened. In a flash, there was a little head that came up on the other side of the door. It was a little chipmunk. And that look on the chipmunk's face was like, oh my God! Oh no! And the look on Cushy's face was, ooh, what luck! And the cat lunged forward, but of course he was on the leash. Like that. Chipmunk was the lucky one in that moment. And me, got to see that event. It was so funny, his face. Yeah. Well, we had a lot of wonderful moments with Cushy, and he did a lot of things. Like some of his memorable things that we'll always remember is his come hither and pet me. And of course, you know, every one of your pets has these endearing moments of what they do to get your attention. So we just adored having him like that. Also, another time, I remember that we forgot to feed him, and Cushy had a wonderful voice. He really didn't have a meowy yowie sound. He had a chirp. He went brr, brr, right? So when we forgot to feed him, I remember that he actually went over to the cabinet door and where the food is, and he started patting the door and looking at us going brr, brr, brr. So that was kind of neat.
Yeah, Cushy was a wonderful kitty. He had that, he'd curl on his back and hold his paws up like this, and I called it the world's cutest kitty pose. He did have a heart murmur when we took him to the vet after Christine gave him to us, and the vet told us we had some concerns on that heart murmur. It wasn't real bad, but we had to eventually take him to get a sonogram and get medication. A couple of months after we started this treatment, he started staying away from the house, and he stayed away for 2 nights one time, and we couldn't understand what was going on. But apparently improving his heart function also improved his libido, and he decided he wanted to visit some of the female cats in the area. And so we later found out he had been as far away as about a half a mile from the house looking for a girlfriend, and as far as we know he didn't find one. But all of a sudden he took off. This was on May 19th in the spring, and no sign of Cushy, and we put up posters and we called the animal control officer again, and no report of Cushy. They just told us that there were a lot of missing cats because of foxes and coyotes, and so we were pretty worried. I even consulted 2 different psychics, and one of the psychics told me that she saw him dead beside the road near some railroad tracks, and the neighboring town of Brunswick is the only place that has railroad tracks. I later consulted another psychic, and she told me that Cushy was taken in by a family of elderly people who lived nearby, and that they didn't get out much and they didn't see our ads and posters, and that their children came and they fell in love with Cushy and they took him away out of state. And so I had 2 reports from the psychics, that he was, one that he was dead and the other that he was a long way away, and we didn't have much hope for his return. And in the meantime, I had another cat named Sammy, a beautiful black cat that moved in. Almost 6 months later, I came home from work one day and I heard this sound of Cushy behind me, and I turned around and I couldn't believe he was there, all matted with burrs in his fur and his rib bones sticking out, really skinny, you know, but he was alive. After almost 6 months, I picked him up and I took him in the house, and he just devoured the first can of food that I put down. And I was afraid to feed him too much because he was eating so fast, and he would just drive his head into the bowl and just gobble everything up and then look at me like, give me some more.
I was home that night too. I said, what's that sound? I have really good ears. What's that sound? I mean, maybe it's Cushy, remember? And then you went out to investigate, and there he was, and you brought him in your arms, and he looked so bad. He was scrawny, just like you said. And then I remember that you put him down, brought him right here into this living room. His food dish, by the way, is always over there. What I thought the funniest thing was the cat was so happy to see us. He was like, he went to me, and then to Phil, and then to the cat dish. Me, Phil, cat dish. Me, Phil, cat. He was, oh, I don't know what I'm happy about first, to see you guys or to see the food.
Yeah, Cushy really stuck close to home after he came back from his 6-month odyssey, and boy, he was not a fussy eater after that. Anything that you put in his bowl, he would devour it. He was a house kitty, definitely from then on. He really put on some weight, and he got to the point where the vet kept saying he's got to go on a diet. He was a wonderful, very affectionate kitty. He almost seemed to have a dog-like stare. He would just stare at you with these big eyes, and you just couldn't resist him. He was not a lap kitty, but if you sat down, he would love to snuggle up against you and be petted. But he didn't like to be picked up or held in your lap or anything. He had this kind of independent streak. He would go stiff as a board when you tried to pick him up. Just stiffen right out like that.
What happened when Sammy, the black cat, had come and adopted Phil? Cushy had been gone for almost 6 months. And when Cushy came back, there was a cat here in his domain, a male cat in his domain, and there also was a cat door. Now, Cushy had never seen a cat door before, and he had gained a little weight too on top of it after he had been here a little while. And he just refused to use that cat door, but he just, the look on that cat's face when he would watch the black cat, Sammy, come in and out of that door was hilarious, because he couldn't believe that a cat could go through a door. And even though we tried to teach him how to do this so we wouldn't have to be the chauffeur all the time, you know, ushering him in and out, it took him quite a while to trust that thing and figure out how to do it. But he had a great amount of awe and respect for the black cat, even though he hated that black cat taking his space and his couch and his food, and they didn't get along at all for a long time. But that look on Cushy's face to discover that a cat could go right through a door was something else to behold. I love that. I loved that little guy. I loved his humor. He was a funny cat. He had an expression on his face that looked so serious it would just make you crack up no matter what he was looking at. He was looking at a fly. He was looking at it. That's what cats are known for, I suppose. When I moved to Florida, it was during Phil and our separation. I thought maybe I should move to Florida. And I lived with my mother for a little while. That was a mistake. Two very independent women. One day I had gone off to a pool when my mother lived in this retirement community. I went off to a pool to cry, and I had my cell phone, so I called Phil, and Phil wasn't home. They had the answering machine on. So I just cried into the answering machine. Phil, I want to come home.
Yeah, I came home and I turned on the answering machine, and Cushy, of course, was right there, waiting for dinner. And Judy's message came on. Oh, Phil, I'm so unhappy. And Cushy was turning his head and looking and trying to figure out what was wrong and where was Judy. And he was, so concerned, especially because she was crying. He thought Judy was in the answering machine. Well, he also developed some other medical problems. Cat asthma. He was having episodes of gasping for breath. A week before Thanksgiving, I came down and he started to have an asthma attack. He was panting and gasping, and finally went outdoors and fell over. And I rushed him to the vet. Then about 10 minutes later, the vet came out and she said, I'm sorry, but Cushy had a heart attack, and his heart stopped beating by the time you brought him in, and we tried to resuscitate him, but we couldn't. He was a good boy. We hope he's at peace and has a chance to rest, find a really, really good home. Certainly know that he's was well loved and well cared for, and he was very special to both of us.
If you could say something to him right now, what would you say?
I'm happy that you're at peace and that your physical health problems are all over with. I'm glad you were there for us, and I really appreciate your being with us. Coming back after you ran away. It must have been very difficult getting home, because you looked like you'd been starving for over a month or something when you came home.
And I'm going to miss all the funny little voices that I concocted for this cat. He didn't ask me to, of course, but I had these gazillion things. I'd look at him and I'd go, Kitty do, Kitty do. Kitty wants something to eat. I have all these funny little voices. I never tired of looking at your cute little face. Even the way you went up the stairs when you were in a hurry, it looked so funny. It looked like a moving centipede on fast speed. We're just really going to miss you, and we hope that this little adventure in animal stories will inspire other people to share their love of animals. Most of all, it's all about love. It's all about love.